Hi, my name is Ryan. I'm with Texas United Realty. I have Holly here. Holly, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we're going to go over some very important documents that will be extremely helpful to y'all in the future. Go ahead, Holly.
My name is Holly Presley. I'm with Allegiance Title, vintage office off of 249. I've been in title for 21 years. So, and I'm always open. You guys can call me 7 days a week. I don't care till 9 o'clock, and I'll help you on. If I can't answer something that you've asked me, I will find it out and call you right back. So that's my job, is here to make your job easier. So, and you're gonna have questions. So all I need for you guys is just to call me. I'll be here to help you.
What is your email address, Holly?
My email address is hpresley, Presley, @allegiancetitle.com.
That's going to be important for you guys because we're going to go over some things that you may need a title company to help answer for y'all. If
And
you
my
take a listing or whatnot.
Cell phone number is 713-248-0316.
Okay, so first things first, guys, we're going to go over a closing disclosure. Y'all should have a copy of it. If not, let me know. We're going to kind of go over it as to the numbers and the whys and all that stuff. Does anybody need a copy of that?
Should look just like that. I think everybody had a
Okay.
copy of that? Okay.
So Holly, hit the highlights for us and tell us the whys. I always like to know the whys.
Okay, this is a FHA contract between seller and buyer, and of course I had to white out addresses, sellers and buyers, because you can't see that after it's closed. You can see on the front page it says cash to close. This is what the buyer's gonna have to bring, but let's go back to, if you see, loan amount was 200, this house was, sales price was 250. Loan amount is 245,471. The interest rate on this loan was 4%. Their PI, their monthly principal and interest is $1,171.92. But when you come down and add principal and interest and the mortgage insurance and your estimated escrow, it's $1,866.74. And then you have your monthly taxes and insurance. A month was $525.30.
I'll hit on that briefly, guys. Your clients are going to ask you, what is my payment? They're always going to ask you that, okay? Right. So here's the street version, okay? You need to explain to them it's PITI,
right.
Principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, okay? The lender oftentimes is going to quote PI, principal and interest, right? So on your car note, you're going to pay the note back plus the interest, right? Okay, well, other than unlike the car, there's taxes and insurance involved that are often involved or rolled into your payment, called escrowing, okay? Now, if your client says, I don't like escrowing, meaning I just want to make my principal and interest in the payment, and I will pay the insurance and taxes on my own. Okay, if the lender allows, oftentimes they won't allow, just FYI. If the lender allows, then you can do that. One of the properties that I own, I don't have the interest, I don't have the taxes or the insurance rolled into the payment. So guess what? At the end of every year, I have to pay those taxes out of my pocket. And it stinks.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I have to pay my insurance every time it's due. I think it's due in June of every year. So, most time, they're gonna want everything rolled into their payment called escrowing. So their PITI is rolled into the loan. Well, how can you give them an estimate of the monthly payment without knowing which house they're gonna buy? You can't, because you don't know the insurance. But once you zone in on that house, oftentimes I send it to the lender, and the lender will look up the taxes and then give an estimated insurance and give us a more accurate. So, okay, continue, Holly,
So
sorry.
is the 525.30 rolled into 186.74 or no?
So, yes,
Yes.
the
Rolled it in there or?
Yes, it's
Yes.
included in there. It's included in there.
right. And then there's the other thing, don't forget, called that nasty word we don't like, that PMI. When you don't put 20% down or so, it depends on the lender. That's mortgage insurance. Mortgage insurance does not really benefit your client. It benefits the mortgage company, because that's mortgage insurance in case of a default.
So you have to ask for PI.
The lender will have to tell you how much the PI will be.
Yeah.
And that's a monthly payment that they have to
It is
add
included
on to
in their
it?
monthly payment,
Payment.
and it is in monthly payment installments, right, Holly?
Right. Okay, second page, you have, The highlighted in pink are the buyer's charges, and then yellow is the seller's charges, okay?
Great.
They're being charged for. So on the buyers, it's gonna be confusing for you guys, but without sitting down to show you. The application fee for a buyer was $305, lender's fee was $250. Now, these can change with your lenders, it can be the same or it can be different. It just all depends on the lenders. Attorney's fee, preparation for the docs was $150. Then you had compliance review fee was $200. A credit report was $12.75. A employment verification, they charged them $10. Flood certification was $10, and your premium mortgage insurance, here it is $4,221.87. And then your tax service is $75, and undisclosed debt report was $31.25. These are all fees that a lender can charge a buyer on FHA. And then down on number C, there was a survey fee, and they had to buy a survey, which was $449.24. Electronic recording is $8, and then a guarantee fee is $2. And then you had a lender's endorsements fee of $129.95. And then you had lender's title policy was $1,599 for this house because it was $250. And then your title settlement fee was $490, or escrow fee was $490. And the sellers also have to pay for the escrow fee. If you look to the other side, that's a normal amount that everybody pays. And coming down, I'm just gonna do buyers right now, and
That's fine.
recording fees wound up to be $150. You had a deed for $22, mortgage $78. And then your homeowner's insurance for this house was $2,249. And your prepaid interest from the day they closed, which was 2/8 to 3/1, is $564.90. And that wound up to be $2,101.20. And then your homeowner's insurance was $749.68. And then your property taxes was, per month. They didn't put that in there. Okay, yes it did, I'm sorry. Property taxes for 5 months was $1,689.40. So all those total up at the bottom was $5,065.10. And plus all their closing costs, all this total was $13,448.11. And they gave them a credit at the bottom for $48.95. So it goes back to the front page, is their closing cost was $14,849.16. And cash to close, to bring to close, they had to bring, because it was FHA, $4,581.94.
So, Holly, why would cash to close be less than the closing cost? Give me a scenario.
Well, that's, the closing costs are all the fees that we just
Correct?
talked about, but they have to bring something to close a cash.
So possibly the seller paid for some of their closing costs?
Correct,
Most of
because
their
it was
closing
an,
costs?
because it was an FHA.
Right.
So
Like
this
we-
is for the buyer or seller?
Buyer.
So essentially, in this scenario, I don't have the contract in front of me, but essentially, guys, why is it less? Because the seller in the contract paid the buyer's closing costs.
Right,
But FHA requires that that buyer bring their down payment to the table unless
which
there's
was
a-
4%.
Right, well, unless they had down payment assistance or something like that.
Right.
Okay. So, Holly, who normally, or I should say typically, in the state of Texas pays for the title policy?
That's negotiable now. It used to be, sellers used to pay for it all the time. So just recently, they've changed that where a buyer can pay for it and a seller can pay for it. So here, when you write a contract, if you're, and you have multiple offers, when you go in to make your offer, you need to go in, and if you have the buyer say, I'll pay for the title policy, and make sure that you write your title policy, the company that you want, and see if you can win it that way.
My old school train of thought is I always have the seller pay for it, especially when I'm representing the buyer, even if I'm going into multiple offers. I typically will keep that there. I just might go up on the sales price, but it's hard to change my stubborn mind from the old school way of the seller paying it.
But that's the new way, and there's a lot of, Laura just did a house, $60,000 over. And can't remember if you had sellers pay for title policy or the buyers did.
Buyers bought it.
Buyers did. This is the game we're in right now, and it used to be interest rate of 4%. They used to, not 2 years ago, there was 3.25. I can remember when they were 21%.
Bought my first house at 7.5%.
Yeah, so it's been a big change. We have a lot of changes
It's,
happening.
the title policy, to not confuse you, in my day, was this, normally, typically, I should say, it's always been negotiable, so don't get that
Right,
wrong.
yeah.
But typically, I had the seller pay for it. But since all these multiple offers, people are changing the way they. So an easy way for y'all to explain to your buyers what closing costs is, I break it down into 5 things. I break it down into title company fees, meaning what do I pay Holly to go to the closing table? I break it into lender fees. What is the lender charging my buyer? Because they're not gonna work for free, okay? I break it into an escrow fee, so they have to put money in, if they're escrowing their payment, they have to put a buffer account, I call it, maybe you call it something else, okay? So the lender requires some buffer of taxes and insurance being in this account. It is their money, they just can't access that until they sell the property or refinance
Right,
or pay the loan off,
right.
okay? And then the other thing is miscellaneous. So like your inspector fees, your survey,
If you have to
Things
order a
like
new
that.
survey.
So you got title fee, lender's fee, what else?
escrow fees, which is your prepayment items, and then your miscellaneous like inspection and survey.
There's only 4.
Appraisal.
Then 4, appraisal, I would probably throw into the miscellaneous. Can you think of anything else, Laura?
Then who
Does that-
would pay for the inspection right up front? Out of pocket?
Okay, so good point. The inspector is usually requires his fee to be paid up front. Meaning, when he does the inspection of the home, he wants the money for that. Because he's not gonna wait till closing to get paid. And he's gonna get paid regardless, because he's done the work. Oftentimes, the lenders are also requiring the appraisal to be paid outside of closing as well. Am I right, Holly?
Yes, and you also need to tell them on new houses, they still need to have an inspection.
So, we'll do that in another video,
Okay,
but
and
Holly
then-
made a great point. Every home should have an inspection done. Your client doesn't have to, because oftentimes they will ask you that, but I would stress that they do. It's paid off more times than it hasn't, and even if it's a brand new home, it's made by human hands, so remember that. I would always have your buyers do a home inspection by a TREC licensed inspector.
Why so?
Because when you have a new builder going in and they're building 25 houses in a row, and they have, okay, we're gonna do this many jobs on this house, we're gonna go to the next house and do this so many things, and then the next one, they're probably maybe missed something. And I had some friends of ours, we just visited over the weekend, and they had bought a new house, and exactly that's what happened. And
Oh.
they had to go back and say, you need to fix this, this, and this.
I'll give you a real life example. When I bought my house, I know what the inspectors look at because, by the way, I go to all my home inspections. I make a point to go to all my home inspections and all my closings. No ands, ifs, or buts. Because if the inspector's pointing things out and you're not there, how are you gonna know how to negotiate those repairs if you weren't there? And it's a lot easier to see that in person. So my real time, I bought, this is my house, so I can talk about it. I bought my house, I had a home inspection done. I could have already told you what he was gonna find wrong, because that's how many home inspections I've been to. This was my own house, so I had the choice to do it. I did it. He found that the AC was kaput, okay? So what the inspection cost me $400 or $500, take that in mind, that was $400 or $500. Well, he wrote up that the AC, my HVAC unit, was toast, gone, out of life expectancy. I brought that to the seller, or the seller's agent, and I negotiated $5,000. If I hadn't had that inspection report, I wouldn't have gotten that $5,000. Because they would have said, you told me it's broken? Who are you? You're a real estate agent, and I would have had to say, you're right, I'm not a licensed inspector. So think about that. When your clients maybe do some pushback of why, maybe that's something to consider. So, real quick, Holly, we'll go over the survey. What do we look for when we're doing briefly, when we're looking at a survey?
This is a new one, so he just showed me, this is one of his houses, but you're looking for easements that are not in this drawing here. And there's sometimes they miss them. But when you do a T47 is when you have houses that are 10 years old or whatever, and they still have their survey. A 1047 has a paragraph in here saying, are there been any changes to this property? And you go, none. But then they want this date that's recorded on this stamp to make sure that it correlates with this survey.
So a good thing you brought up the T47, guys, whenever you have your seller share the survey, which United Real Estate does not like sharing the old survey. They just think it's a liability. Because sometimes there's a trademark on these surveys. So if the buyer needs to go back onto the surveyor is gonna say, I didn't do that survey for you, I did it for these people. Do you get where I'm going with that? So if you were to use the old survey, you do need to have a T47 that's notarized, okay? And you need to make sure there was no changes done to the survey.
Okay, any survey that comes through, we get a contract and seller provides us with a survey. We have to send this off to our plant. And if our plant approves it, then we have a good survey. If not, they come back and say, this was not readable, or you couldn't make out the drawing of where the property was. And if they have a better one, that's fine, they can provide it. If not, then a survey is gonna have to be done.
And that's why the contract has the boxes checked,
Right.
which person buys it if it's not acceptable to the title company.
Right.
And that's why it's really important to read your contract before you present it to your buyer and find out what's best for them, if you're
Right.
working for the buyer, of course.
Right.
Okay, so what is ZOCAM?
Okay. ZOCAM is a new program that just came out, I guess in the last year. The buyers can send in their earnest money and option fee through ZOCAM. They can also bring us a check in one lump sum, or they can call or email the title company and ask for wiring instructions, and it can be wired at the same time.
And briefly, why, we just talked about this
Right.
before we started this meeting. Why is it ever uber important in the HOA mandatory membership addendum, which we will go over more in detail later, we don't have time for that today. But why is it so important? What is C cover? And if I'm the listing agent and let's say there was $200 in that line, what could possibly go wrong if I only put $200 in that line? And take in mind, I'm the listing agent.
Okay.
So what is C, what all fees does C cover is what I'm trying to ask.
Okay, fee and deposits for reserves, except as provided by paragraph A and B and D up is when you want deed restrictions and copy of the deed restrictions. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. So that's what A, B, and C is for, the 1, 2, 3, 4. But you get it down here in the deposits in it, because except as provided by paragraph A, B, and D, and pay any excess association fee, deposit reserves. But a transfer of the property, transfer of property means they're gonna transfer from seller to the buyer's name. That's a set fee. That's usually a seller's fee, and that's usually anywhere from $250. Okay.
But the catch is, guys, with that one, y'all probably need to write this down. C covers it's saying all charges associated with the transfer of the property. So what if that HOA charges an entrance and an exit fee, which I've seen in the thousands?
What form is that?
That's
This
the HOA. addendum.
HOA addendum, TREC number 36-9, TXR 1922. C is where you need to focus your attention. If you're the listing agent and you take a listing, you need to call the HOA or the title company, and you need to ask for what all fees are associated with the transfer of that property. If it's just a flat HOA fee of a couple $100, fine. But let me give you a scenario. I closed on a $650,000 house. There was an entrance, an exit, and a transfer fee. I represented the buyer, thankfully. I put in a note not to exceed $350. I went to closing and I read the settlement statement. And it was $3,500 to transfer that property. You got me right, $3,500. I read the settlement statement and there was an entrance, exit, and transfer fee. I told the title company, my buyer's not paying that because I have on here $350. They said, well, it's customary that the buyer pays the entrance fee, the seller pays the exit fee, and your buyer pays the transfer fee. I said, I don't care what's customary. I care what's in the contract. Then she changed it. She capped it at $350 and the seller had to pay the $3,000. What if I was the listing agent on that one? How mad would he have been if I was his agent and he just had to spend $2,000 more than he thought he would have to?
So HOA's got fees.
Absolutely.
And it's usually with
And
the,
it's negotiable or no?
Yes,
Yes.
it's in this HOA addendum.
Okay, it's.
But if I was the listing agent, I would have called the homeowners association and I would have asked for all their fees associated with the transfer of that property. And when they told me $3,000, as the listing agent, I would have made sure $3,000 was written on this line. I would have wanted the buyer to pay for that.
So, the HOA, you.
It's pretty simple. The HOA charges several fees. They not only do they charge the yearly mandatory fees, they charge fees to transfer that property. Okay, so C talks about the transfer, the fees associated with the transfer of the property. D talks about the fees, to make it easy for you, to do with gathering the information beforehand, so the title company has that for their settlement statement and
it's called
whatnot.
a statement of accounts.
Okay,
And
So
that's,
besides the monthly fees that the homeowners get, they get additional fees at closing?
yes, when they close, if they're in this subdivision where there's an entrance and an exit fee, and they don't, well, okay, I'll give you an example. The newer subdivisions are more likely to do that because they can charge an entrance and an exit fee. And that's what the newer ones are doing, because I guess it's costing them more to build their houses than these subdivisions. But any HOA, a listing agent should automatically just call them and say, what are your fees?
they're also charging like a capitalization fee, that's
Yep.
for like improvements,
Mhm.
okay? So that they have the money for that, but it's lumped into the transfer of the property is how they're wording it. So you need to be careful about that C line, like I said. So the easy explanation to me is C is to do with the transfer of the property, D is to do with beforehand, before the transfer. What information does Holly need to be able to get the paperwork together, okay? So, and then there's two boxes, either the buyer or the seller pays for that. The tricky one is C, which fees associated with the transfer of the property can be $100 to several thousand. And you need to be careful depending on who you represent in that situation.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Right, either way.
Okay?
Okay, I think we're gonna go over one more thing, and then we're gonna let Laura
Yes.
have it.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm sorry this is short notice, but Thursday, I have my CEO from our company out of Dallas is coming in, and she's gonna be teaching a class called The Dirty Dozen, and it's called Common Contract Problems. This goes anywhere from seller's disclosure, your property definition, earnest money and option fee, survey issues, title objections, special provisions, inspections, lease